You're watching Aboriginal TV Channel 4. My name is Rachel Chisholm, and in the studios with me now is Commissioner Andrea Mason, OAM, and Commissioner Alastair McKwin, who are in Darwin at the moment to talk to Territorians about the Royal Commission into the abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disabilities. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mason, can you please inform our audiences why this Royal Commission was launched?
For a number of years, the disability sector has raised concern about violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of Australians with disability, including First Nations people and people from core communities, culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And we also had stories that were important media stories that also informed the Australian community about the abuse that had been occurring. And so that groundswell of support eventually led to the government calling this Royal Commission last year in April. So it is specifically looking at the violence, the abuse, exploitation, neglect of people with disabilities across all settings in the community. So it has a very, very broad set of terms of reference.
Commissioner McKwin, can you please talk about what the terms of reference are for this Royal Commission?
The terms of reference for the Disability Royal Commission are very broad. They require us to investigate all forms of violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation in all settings across all forms of disability. So as you can imagine, it's very broad, and this gives the disability community, people with disabilities and their families and supporters and organisations, an opportunity to put a spotlight on the stories that we know will be horrific and yet across all settings.
Who is on the board of the Royal Commission? Because it is a specific group of individuals. So yourself is on the board, Commissioner Mason, and you, Commissioner McKwin. Are members of the commission, are they also people with disabilities?
Thank you for that question. There are 7 commissioners. The chair of the Disability Royal Commission is the Honourable Ronald Sackville, AOQC, and he is working with 6 other commissioners, and they are Commissioner Rosalind Atkinson, Commissioner Rhonda Galbally, Commissioner Barbara Bennett, Commissioner John Ryan, Commissioner Mason and myself. And it is important to note that because the terms of reference specifically reference First Nation, it is critical and vital that we have someone who is Indigenous, and we have a wonderful leader in Commissioner Mason. We also have 2 commissioners with disability, myself and Rhonda Galbally.
Yeah. So we've got people on that commission board who, can speak for the community and who have experiences in what you're looking for.
Yes, we have committed to putting the voice of people with disabilities front and centre. We have also committed, and we are working hard on this, and this is why we're here in the Northern Territory this week, to putting the voices of people from particular cohorts, such as First Nation people and people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities.
Yep.
We've also been talking about the importance of language. While we've been here in the top end, we've been talking to people, organisations about the importance of language, and that First Nations people must have the opportunity to tell their story in their first language. Mm-hmm. But we also want to get the message out about the Disability Royal Commission in Aboriginal languages. Mm-hmm. And so we know that there's a lot of expertise and capability here in Darwin because of the reach and extent of people who live in this region who still speak their first language. So that's really front of mind. And of course, while we're here in Darwin, we are hearing people speaking their language. And so, of course, we have to make this Royal Commission accessible, not only right across people with all forms of disability, but people from those diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
So it's been wonderful to see that that capability is alive and well here, and we're looking forward to engaging and looking at how we can connect that to the work that the Royal Commission is doing.
To both of you, as we all know, this is not a gentle subject for people out there. Do you have any ways or methods for people who might be a little bit shame job to come and talk to you about the story? What are ways for they to get in contact with you and be anonymous?
Yes. So the organisations that do reach into communities where we have our First Nations people with disability, where they live, where their families are, we are really keen to engage with those organisations because there's relationship, there's trust there. So it's firstly us really talking about the Royal Commission and what it aims to do. And we also need to be proactive in going out, not asking people to come to us. So we do have an engagement strategy, and we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working in the Royal Commission to help with making those connections. But we also want to have information sessions right across the country. And of course, sometimes the catalyst of setting up engagement may be because we have a hearing coming up. Mm-hmm. That in a sense, that seems to grab people's attention leading up to it. So that helps us to explain about the Royal Commission, its work, but also how people can engage to tell their story. So, for example, next week in Western Sydney, we have a hearing on health, which is particularly focused on people with cognitive disability, such as intellectual disability. But in May this year, we're going to have a First Nations hearing in the Northern Territory. Yeah. So that's the reason why we're here this week, and we'll keep coming back to the Territory to start to form a picture on the focus of that hearing in May.
Yeah.
So we really encourage First Nations people to tell the truth, to talk about what they are seeing, and to encourage people who have a disability, who have experience in one or more settings, violence or abuse, neglect or exploitation. And there are different ways that people can tell that story, but also protections in telling that story. So we'd encourage people to engage, check out our website. We also have a number which I'd like to give. It's our National Counselling and Referral Service, 1800 421 468. And the people there at that call centre will be able to answer any questions around support, whether it's legal support, counselling support, financial support, and how people can engage with the Royal Commission.
Yeah. Thank you. The Royal Commission was launched in April last year. What has happened in that time period? We're coming up to 8 months, yeah?
We've been very busy, so we've done a range of things. We've had a workshop, so preliminary workshop, where we've asked the community to give us some ideas about the things that we can work on. So we had one here in Darwin in August last year with First Nation people. Mm-hmm. We also had one in Sydney around about the same time. We also had workshop with advocates. We've had workshop with lawyers. We've also been working very hard on our information and our document to make sure that people know how to contact or speak with the Royal Commission in any way that they can. The commissioners have been extremely busy working at our schedule, so we've released the 6-month schedule for this year. It's available on the website, and we've also been making sure that we've been accessible. Our terms of reference require us to be accessible, and I think it's fair to say that we have been leading the way in making sure this is probably the most accessible Royal Commission ever held. Of course, we've still got things to improve, but certainly we are listening to the community and making sure that the way that they engage with us is on their terms and in the way that is most comfortable to them.
Yeah, because that is important. People need to be in that comfortable and safe environment to tell those true, honest stories. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. would you like to tell the audience or inform the audience how those individual stories will help in the overall inquiry?
We have not assumed that all Australians understand the experience of people with disability and the harm, the discrimination, the violence, the abuse, the neglect, the exploitation, the isolation, the exclusion that people experience on a daily basis. That's a story that all Australians know. So it's an absolute privilege. It's a very deep responsibility to ensure that we don't re-traumatise people in that process of them telling their story. So we're capturing those experiences, and of course we are able to then look at how those stories can be elevated into the hearings that we will be holding on the different topics, issues, papers, those different forms of recording those experiences. So I think that's a really important point. We don't want to re-traumatise, but we, as our people have said since 2017, this is a time for truth-telling. And I think all Australians understand what that means. We also know that for our communities, there's often been a stigma, a shame, even a reluctance, because often we take care of our own. We understand that everyone has a place in our families, and we don't often defer that to external providers or governments. That comes with some difficulty because often people need extra support and resources. So there's a balance in that of honouring people's commitment to care for family on country, so people can have that strong identity and belonging. But it's also, as citizens of Australia, their opportunity to have the support that they are entitled to as Australians. So wanting to do that in a very respectful way, but opening up, telling people the story of what's happening behind closed doors in settings such as group homes, for example, which we looked at last year, or what's happening in education, in classrooms, around inclusion. All of those stories are really important so that all Australians understand why the change is needed. And actually why the change is needed, not just for people with disabilities, but for all of us as members and citizens of this country, because we all become better as a result of that. That the inclusion of all Australians in the life and the future of our country. So for me, it's a very high responsibility, but we also know it's a very personal process. So we're very conscious and aware of that. Would you agree, Alastair?
Absolutely, and it's important to remember in some communities, perhaps for example ethnic communities, disability is seen as a source of shame. So we've got to make sure that people with disability know that the Royal Commission is here to investigate the breaches of their human rights which they may not be aware of. So absolutely, we've got our work cut out. However, we are rising to the challenges.
Yeah, people need to know out there that telling the truth, there is no consequences. It's about helping, growing and healing. That's what the Royal Commission is about.
Let the light shine through.
That's it. Well, thank you both for that. Is there anything else you would like the audiences to know in regards to the Royal Commission into abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disabilities?
I might just make one really reiterated point. This is an opportunity for people with disability to tell us of their experiences in whatever way is comfortable with them. If they want to sit down and record themselves in their native language or their first language, absolutely, they can send it to us and we will translate it into English and to make sure that we understand the issue. So I can't emphasise that enough. This is an opportunity to be comfortable telling, of course, very shocking stories in many situations, but in a way that comes naturally to them.
I think Alastair's covered it. It's really making this Royal Commission as we've been asked to do, inclusive and accessible to all people with all forms of disability, their families and their carers, to be able to feel safe about coming in and telling their story, their experiences to the Royal Commission. We know that there are 60,000 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people with disability, a profound disability in Australia, and that number is increasing. We know that there is a connection to poverty, there's a connection to racism, there's a connection to discrimination in the life experiences of First Nations people with disability. And it's just not one way, one story. It is increasingly diverse. So we're in the Northern Territory this week, but we have been moving around Australia, and we will be visiting and speaking to people from every jurisdiction. We want to hear those local stories. We want to hear those stories that tell of a particular place and time and situation. And we have a plan. You can see that on the calendars that we have on our website. But actually, I think Australians are very comfortable with saying, well, you have a plan there, but let me just tell you about what I've been experiencing. Yeah. So we encourage that as well, people just saying this is what my life is all about and what I'm experiencing. And of course, leave it to us to be able to make sure that that is treated in the most sensitive way, but also so that story adds to the Royal Commission's evidence and body of work that will lead to what we believe a report and recommendations that will be transformative for people with disabilities and their families and carers, particularly First Nations people.
Thank you, Commissioner Andrea Mason and Commissioner Alastair McKwin, for coming into the studio and informing our audiences about the Royal Commission into the abuse, neglect and exploitation of Australians with disabilities. The Commission is going on for till 2022?
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah, so there is plenty of time for people to find their bravery and tell these stories if need be. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're watching Aboriginal TV Channel 4 and you are listening to Larrakia Radio as well as Australian Indigenous Radio off the Vast Satellite 913. My name is Rachel Chisholm. Thank you for watching.